"Stop pretending you don't recognize me, Daniel." Her voice sliced through the ballroom like glass. The crowd froze, champagne flutes midair. He laughed, awkward, until she pulled a silver card from her clutch, the hotel's ownership badge, engraved, Madeline Hayes, owner. The color drained from his face. He wasn't just standing in luxury. He was standing in her empire. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, Malaysia, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Bloomington, Indiana, the kind of Midwestern town that looked calm from the outside but thrived on quiet gossip. Everyone knew everyone's business, except hers. Madeline Hayes, 38, had mastered the art of being invisible, a quiet, steady woman who worked behind the scenes while her husband, Daniel Brooks, basked in applause he didn't earn. She'd met him 12 years earlier when he was all ambition and no foundation. He sold dreams faster than he built them, and she believed everyone. Because love makes you believe, doesn't it? She co-signed his loans, edited his presentations, stayed up rewriting business pitches until dawn. He rose because she never slept. But success changes people differently. Daniel started to crave attention the way others craved air. He liked expensive suits and louder laughter. He liked women who looked like trophies, not teammates. And he'd started coming home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Still, Madeline stayed. Because loyalty felt safer than starting over. One Thursday night, remember this detail, she noticed a smudge of coral lipstick on his white shirt. It wasn't hers. She washed it anyway. But while the washing machine spun, something inside her clicked into silence. From that night, she stopped waiting for explanations. She started listening instead. And what she heard changed everything. At first, it was harmless chatter, a voice message labeled, "Vanessa, client dinner." Then another, "Vanessa Cruz, interior design proposal." That name would matter later. For now, Madeline tucked it away like a weapon she wasn't ready to use. 2 weeks later, Daniel bragged at a dinner party about how some people were born to follow, others to own. The line stung more than she'd admit, because the guests laughed at her. She smiled anyway. But here's the part nobody saw coming. When everyone left, she went into her late father's study, the room Daniel avoided because it smelled of old books and accountability. There she found a box labeled Hayes Holdings. Inside, dusty deeds, faded signatures, and one letter with her father's looping handwriting. If this reaches you, Maddie, remember, a true empire begins in silence. She almost laughed. But curiosity pushed harder than pain. She searched the attached documents. One stood out, Fairmont Hotel Property Deed, Bloomington, Indiana. The same old building she passed every morning, boarded up and forgotten. Now pause for a second. Because this is where everything shifted. The next day, she called the county records office. The property was headed for auction, the debt cleared, the opportunity open. And here's where causation kicks in. Because Daniel had mocked her small ambitions, she decided to make a bigger move than he'd ever dare. She mortgaged the last of her catering income, liquidated a quiet inheritance, and bought the hotel under M. Hayes Enterprises. No one knew. Not even her husband. That secret became her heartbeat. By spring, renovations were underway. New glass, new flooring, new purpose. But she didn't tell a soul. Because silence builds momentum. And momentum attracts irony. One afternoon, Daniel swaggered into the kitchen scrolling his phone. "Got a new client," he said. "Big one. The Fairmont Grand. The owner's some silent investor. They're trusting me with the renovation contracts." Madeline almost dropped her coffee. "That's so," she said. "Yeah," he grinned. "The guy's lucky I'm the best in town." She smiled, because this would come back later. Now, remember the name Vanessa Cruz? She resurfaced as Daniel's consultant. And guess who he decided to impress by taking her to the Fairmont Grand's pre-launch gala? Madeline didn't confront him. Instead, she personally approved their reservation under Mr. Daniel Brooks plus guest. She even arranged the flowers in their suite, white lilies, the ones he used to bring her after arguments. Opening night glowed with champagne, laughter, and camera flashes. Daniel strutted through the lobby like he owned the place. Vanessa clung to his arm, glittering in gold. He bragged to anyone listening that the mysterious owner had hired him for the job. "Wait till I meet the guy," he said. "He owes me a favor." He didn't notice the staff greeting a woman in a navy blazer quietly making rounds, Mrs. Hayes, the owner. Every handshake, every whisper built tension like a ticking clock. At 8:17 p.m., the band paused. Daniel raised his glass for a toast. To success, partnership, and the power of. The ballroom doors opened. Madeline stepped inside. The chandeliers caught the silver badge pinned to her lapel, Fairmont Grand, owner. A murmur swept through the room. Daniel froze mid-sentence. She met his eyes, calm, unreadable. And that's when the real story began. The letter from her father, "A true empire begins in silence," will echo later when she publicly exposes Daniel's betrayal. We still don't know what Madeline will do with her newfound power, or how far she'll go. If you've ever been dismissed, laughed at, or told you'd never be enough, remember Madeline. Because sometimes the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just building something no one's ready to see. So if you believe silence can speak louder than betrayal, stay and subscribe to this channel. The next part will remind you why strength often walks in heels no one hears. The air inside the Fairmont Grand hung thick with champagne and ego. Daniel Brooks had always been addicted to attention, but tonight he overdosed on it. He clinked glasses with investors, spun half-truths into glory, and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. His mistress, Vanessa Cruz, stayed close, smiling like victory personified. But here's the part nobody talks about. The higher a man builds his arrogance, the louder it shatters. Madeline didn't plan to humiliate him. She wanted to observe, to stand quietly and see the man he became when he thought she wasn't watching. But fate, as always, had its own sense of humor. As Daniel bragged to a cluster of guests near the piano about his partnership with the owner, a young concierge accidentally spilled a tray of wine. It splashed across Vanessa's gold dress. The room gasped. Vanessa's eyes flared. Daniel barked, actually barked, at the trembling employee, demanding he be fired. That's when Madeline stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice was calm, but her presence turned every head. "Apologies," she said. "We don't dismiss people for accidents at the Fairmont." The word we echoed louder than the music. Daniel blinked, half drunk, half shocked. "And who exactly are you?" The manager rushed to intervene, whispering nervously, "Mrs. Hayes, please." But it was too late. The name landed like thunder. Every camera phone turned. Every whisper grew teeth. And for the first time, Daniel realized the silent investor he'd been working for was the wife he'd neglected. Now pause for a second. Because that revelation wasn't even the real twist. See, humiliation burns fast, but exposure burns slow. And Madeline wasn't done watching him burn. As murmurs filled the hall, Daniel forced a grin. "So this is your little revenge play, huh?" he sneered under his breath. "Cute. But let's not ruin the evening." He turned back to the guests, pretending composure, raising his glass again. "To partnership," he said. But his voice trembled. And the crowd didn't follow. Because right then, Vanessa's phone lit up on the table beside him. A message preview flashed, clear as crystal. "Still can't believe you're sleeping with a married man. She deserves better." Vanessa grabbed it, but not fast enough. People saw. And the whispers multiplied. Now, remember that scene from earlier, the lipstick, the client dinners, the voice notes labeled, "Vanessa, a proposal?" It all came crashing back. The investors started piecing things together, realizing the renovation contract Daniel bragged about wasn't skill, it was manipulation. He'd been leveraging his wife's silence to build his empire. And now, that silence was what undid him. But here's where things get interesting. Madeline didn't gloat. She simply turned to Vanessa and said, "Enjoy the suite. It's on the house, for tonight." Then she walked away. That single line? It hit harder than any slap could. Because Daniel wasn't angry at her power, he was terrified of it. Later that night, in the quiet after the storm, Daniel cornered Madeline in the hotel's corridor. His mask cracked. "You think you're better than me now?" he hissed. Madeline didn't answer. She just handed him an envelope. Final notice, she said. Your renovation contract, terminated. Inside was a letter from her attorney and a statement showing the Fairmont's assets fully under her name. Daniel's jaw tightened. You can't. Oh, but I already did. She walked off, leaving him staring at his reflection in the glass. The reflection of a man who just realized he'd spent years sleeping beside the woman who quietly built everything he wanted. But it gets crazier. Because while Daniel spiraled, Vanessa made her next move. She cornered the investors at the bar, claiming Madeline had sabotaged Daniel's business out of jealousy. She's bitter, Vanessa whispered. She wanted him all to herself. You know how these rich wives are. That line, rich wives, was a mistake. Because one of the investors, an older man named Harlan Quinn, recognized Madeline's last name. Hayes, he said. As in Hayes Capital? The room went still again. And that's when the second bomb dropped. Unbeknownst to Daniel, Madeline wasn't just the owner of the hotel. Her late father's company, Hayes Capital Holdings, had quietly funded several luxury properties across Indiana. The Fairmont Grand wasn't her debut. It was her inheritance. And the investors? They weren't Daniel's friends, they were hers. She'd been testing his loyalty all along. Now, remember that open loop from earlier, the letter from her father, the line about, a true empire begins in silence? That line became prophecy tonight. Because every arrogant move Daniel made, every insult, every laugh at her expense, built the empire her father promised. And while she built in silence, Daniel built on sand. As the evening wound down, the guests began to leave. But before Daniel could sneak away, Vanessa stormed up to him, hissing under her breath. Next time, tell your wife not to make a fool out of me. Then she tossed her champagne and walked out. Daniel stood alone in the lobby that once felt like his stage. Now it was his spotlight and his punishment. By midnight, the Fairmont Grand was quiet again. Madeline stood on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't crying. She was processing. Because betrayal isn't just an ending, it's a mirror. And when you look long enough, you realize the person who broke you only gave you the hammer to rebuild yourself stronger. Daniel's downfall is only beginning, and soon his financial empire collapses. But the next twist? He'll discover Madeline's kindness still has limits. And revenge, in her world, doesn't always wear cruelty, sometimes it wears grace. As she left the balcony, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think he learned his lesson? He hasn't. Check the news tomorrow. Her hand froze midair. The screen dimmed. And somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. The next morning, the entire town was talking. Bloomington's biggest story wasn't the Fairmont Grand's grand opening anymore. It was Daniel Brooks' public humiliation. But that was just the appetizer. Because by sunrise, the real chaos had begun. Wait, it gets crazier. At 7:14 a.m., the headlines broke. Brooks Development faces federal investigation. Fraud claims under review. Madeline stared at her phone, coffee untouched. She hadn't expected this. She had taken back her power, not his future. But now, the dominoes she didn't even touch were falling faster than she could track. Somehow, someone leaked confidential renovation documents to the media, the same contracts Daniel bragged about at the party. They revealed falsified invoices, inflated figures, and a $600,000 consultation fee paid to none other than Vanessa Cruz. Daniel wasn't just humiliated. He was cornered. Now pause for a second. Remember that mysterious text she got last night? Check the news tomorrow. This was it. Madeline didn't know who sent it, but something told her this wasn't karma, it was strategy. Someone else was moving pieces behind the scenes. And while she was done with Daniel emotionally, she wasn't ready to see him destroyed. Because here's the thing most people forget. Even when you stop loving someone, empathy doesn't switch off. By noon, Daniel was at her door. Same suit, no tie, no arrogance, just desperation. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. Madeline, please, he said, voice cracking. You have to believe me. I didn't do this. Vanessa, She handled those documents. She set me up. She wanted to laugh, because wasn't it poetic? The man who spent years calling her paranoid now begged her to believe him. But she didn't laugh. She just listened. Because deep down, she knew something didn't fit. Daniel was arrogant, selfish, absolutely. But fraudulent? That wasn't his style. He liked applause too much to risk jail. So she told him to leave, but her curiosity stayed. Now, here's where things get interesting. Later that evening, as she reviewed Fairmont's security feeds, one video caught her attention. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m., minutes before she received that text. In the frame, Vanessa Cruz stood in the lobby, not alone. She was talking to Harlan Quinn, the same investor who had recognized Madeline's name. They shook hands, exchanged something that looked like a folder, and walked in opposite directions. That moment hit Madeline like ice water. Because it wasn't Daniel who'd been targeted. It was her. Remember that line her father wrote, "A true empire begins in silence?" Well, that silence just turned into a weapon. Madeline realized she'd built her empire on faith that people around her played fair. But empires don't fall from weakness. They fall from the quiet hands inside their walls. Harlan Quinn wasn't an investor. He was a predator, a businessman who specialized in acquiring struggling properties after scandals ruined their owners. And Vanessa? She was his accomplice. The puzzle finally made sense. Vanessa seduced Daniel to access the hotel's project files. Harlan financed the smear campaign to tank the Fairmont's value. And once the scandal exploded, they'd swoop in to buy it out under a new holding company. Madeline's name, her father's legacy, would have been collateral damage. But fate, ironically, gave her an advantage. Daniel's recklessness had exposed the trap early. So what did she do? She started playing their game back. Now hold on, because this next part changes everything. Madeline reached out to her old law professor, Dr. Camille Dorset, who specialized in corporate ethics. Together, they formed a plan, one that could either restore everything she'd built or destroy her completely. They planted bait. Madeline publicly announced an emergency investors meeting for the following week, promising transparency and restructuring. Word spread like wildfire, and predictably, both Vanessa and Harlan RSVP'd. But here's the twist. Madeline didn't schedule it at the Fairmont. She hosted it at Hayes Tower, her late father's original corporate headquarters, a building wired with cameras and legal witnesses. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud, it's recorded. On the night of the meeting, Daniel showed up uninvited. He looked exhausted, humbled. He told her he'd been subpoenaed but refused to testify against her. Madeline didn't answer right away. Because something in his eyes had changed, not arrogance, not anger, but regret. That was their first real moment of truth in years. And for the first time, she saw not a husband, but a broken man realizing he'd destroyed the only person who ever fought for him. "Madeline," he whispered, "if I can fix this, I will." She didn't respond, because she didn't need promises anymore. She needed proof. The meeting began. Harlan and Vanessa walked in, confident. They thought they were there to negotiate, but they were walking into a confession booth. Every word, every admission, every falsified document was projected live to a panel of federal observers Madeline had invited under sealed summons. When Vanessa realized it, her face went pale. "You can't record this." Madeline finally smiled. "Oh, but I already did." By the time the meeting ended, Harlan and Vanessa were escorted out in handcuffs. Daniel sat in silence, unable to meet her eyes. He wasn't innocent, but for once, he wasn't the villain either. He was a casualty of his own blindness. Madeline's empire stood firm, but something inside her shifted. Because revenge gives satisfaction, not peace. And peace, she realized, had to be built differently. Sometimes life doesn't test us with storms. It tests us with silence. If you've ever felt betrayed by the ones you protected, remember this. Silence isn't weakness. It's the space where strength prepares its return. So if you're still standing after being broken, stay and subscribe to this amazing channel. Because the next part of Madeline's story will remind you, justice has perfect timing. Silence followed the arrests like dust after an explosion. 4 days, the Fairmont Grand was a ghost. Guests canceled bookings, reporters camped outside, and headlines twisted the truth into chaos. Corporate power couple at war. Billionaire heiress exposes fraud ring. Husband caught in love and lies. Every version told a story, except the truth. Madeline stayed inside her office at Hayes Tower, scanning the same articles again and again. Each one turned her victory into spectacle. And here's the part people don't tell you about winning: it can feel just as lonely as losing. But wait, it gets more complicated. Daniel's name dominated the news cycle, but he wasn't hiding. He was rebuilding, slowly, painfully. Reporters expected him to lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he took accountability in the most unexpected way: a public press conference. "I failed my marriage, my career, and my integrity," he said, voice trembling. "But this story isn't about me. It's about a woman who saw what I couldn't." The clip went viral in hours. People started rooting for him again. And Madeline hated that it made her heart ache. Now, pause for a second. Remember the first time she caught him lying? That coral lipstick stain that started everything? That tiny moment was what shattered her illusion, and oddly, what built her independence. But this? Seeing him own his guilt, that cracked something else. Something she thought had long died. Forgiveness doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, disguised as pity. 2 weeks later, the federal case against Harlan and Vanessa closed. They'd both taken plea deals. The property scandal was neutralized. Madeline's empire survived, her father's legacy intact. But the headlines had left scars. Sponsors pulled out. Investors hesitated. People whispered that she'd built success on vengeance. The irony? They praised her strength, while punishing her for it. And for the first time, she realized something sharp. Justice, when served cold, still burns the one holding the tray. Now hold on, because this is where things get interesting again. One rainy afternoon, as Madeline left her office, she saw Daniel waiting by the building entrance. He looked smaller somehow. No suit. No arrogance. Just rain on his face and regret in his posture. "I just wanted to thank you," he said softly, "for saving me from becoming worse than I already was." She wanted to walk past him. She wanted to stay angry. But emotions don't obey logic. They move in strange, circular ways, returning to the same doorstep you swore you'd never revisit. So she listened. Daniel told her about therapy, about trying to rebuild his company, not with investors, but with honesty. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just needed to say he was sorry, for real this time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she didn't walk away either. Now, remember that line her father wrote, "A true empire begins in silence"? It finally made sense. Because silence wasn't just how Madeline built her empire. It's how she learned to heal. And yet, life wasn't done testing her. A week later, she received an envelope marked urgent. Inside, a notice. Harlan's lawyers were appealing his sentence, and the appeal named her as a co-defendant, alleging improper entrapment. In other words, they were trying to paint her as the manipulator. The irony was poetic. The woman who caught a liar was being accused of deceit. That's when the anxiety returned, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt. Because no matter how strong she'd become, there was still a part of her that hated conflict, that just wanted peace. Now, here's the twist nobody saw coming. Daniel stepped back into the story. He offered to testify on her behalf, not for redemption, but protection. "Let me fix one thing before it's too late," he said. She hesitated. She didn't trust him. But she also knew, sometimes, the only person who can close the wound is the one who caused it. The trial was quiet but brutal. Harlan's attorneys twisted every word, trying to frame her as a vindictive ex-wife out for revenge. But then Daniel took the stand. He spoke plainly, not as a victim, not as her husband, but as someone who had finally seen the truth. "Madeline Hayes never sought revenge," he said, voice steady. "She sought respect, something I took for granted. She didn't ruin me. She saved me from myself." The courtroom fell silent. Even Harlan's lawyers didn't speak for a moment. And in that stillness, something shifted, not between them, but within her. Because that was her final closure. Not his apology. Not his testimony. But her realization that forgiveness doesn't mean going back, it means walking forward without bitterness. By the end of the trial, the charges were dismissed. Harlan's appeal collapsed. Madeline walked out free, not just legally but emotionally. That night, she stood again at the Fairmont Grand, the hotel that started it all. Empty ballroom, soft music, city lights beyond the glass. Daniel walked in behind her, quietly this time. He didn't say a word. He just left an envelope on the table. Inside, the divorce settlement, finally signed. No alimony, no conditions, no claims. Just a single note. You deserved peace. I finally understand that. She read it twice, smiled faintly, and looked toward the skyline. This time, there were no tears. Because some endings don't need applause, just quiet acceptance. Daniel walks away for good, but what happens next, an unexpected visitor, tied to Madeline's father's legacy, will reveal that her story of power isn't over. There's one more truth waiting in the shadows. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The scandal became yesterday's gossip, and silence returned to Bloomington, the kind of silence that doesn't just calm you, it confronts you. Madeline Hayes had everything back. Her company, her name, her peace. Yet peace is a strange thing. It doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like emptiness finally learning to breathe again. Now, here's where things get unexpectedly beautiful. Remember that letter from her father. A true empire begins in silence? One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the Hayes Tower archive, she found another one. It had been sealed under an insurance folder she'd never opened. The handwriting was unmistakable. For when the noise is over. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Madeline, if you're reading this, you've survived what I feared most, betrayal. But let me tell you something no empire teaches. The real measure of power isn't what you own. It's what you choose to forgive. She sat still for a long time, tears soft and quiet. It wasn't pain this time, it was recognition. Because forgiveness wasn't letting Daniel off the hook. It was setting herself free. But wait, it gets deeper. That same week, she received an invitation from a women's leadership summit in Chicago. They wanted her to speak about resilience in leadership. At first, she declined. She wasn't ready to stand on a stage again. But then she remembered something her father used to say. If your scars can teach, they're not wounds anymore, they're wisdom. So she went. The conference hall was bright, filled with faces that mirrored her own, tired but hopeful, women who'd been betrayed, underestimated, silenced, or overlooked. When she took the stage, the applause felt different. Not adoring, not performative, just human. She didn't use slides or statistics. She just spoke truth. I used to think silence was weakness, she said. That I had to shout to be seen. But silence isn't surrender. It's power when it's used to rebuild. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is living well enough that you no longer crave it. The room went still. And for the first time in a long time, she felt her purpose return. Now, remember Daniel? He didn't vanish from her story. Because real life doesn't cut villains out, it lets them linger long enough to show growth. Months later, Madeline received an unexpected email. It was short. Thank you for letting me fall. It's the only way I learned how to stand. Daniel. Attached was a photo, a small construction office, rebuilt under a new name, Brooks Integrity Group. No flashy logos. No luxury branding. Just a man finally learning humility. She smiled, closed her laptop and whispered, good. Because closure isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet relief. Hold on, you might ask, what about Vanessa and Harlan? Well, karma has a way of keeping receipts. Vanessa's plea deal required full disclosure. She lost her design license, her clientele, and the image she'd built from deceit. Harlan's companies went bankrupt under investigation. And as poetic justice would have it, the Fairmont Grand later bought one of his foreclosed properties at auction. For $1. The same empire he tried to steal became the one that consumed him. And Madeline didn't celebrate. She just exhaled. Because true revenge never roars. It simply arrives. Months later, spring returned to Bloomington. The Fairmont Grand was thriving again. The same ballroom that once held humiliation now hosted weddings, fundraisers, and second chances. On a quiet Sunday evening, Madeline stood in that room again, soft music playing, city lights glowing outside. Her daughter, Sophie, ran in from the lobby with a sketchbook. "Mom," she said, "what's the word for when something hurts but feels good at the same time?" Madeline smiled. "That's called healing, sweetheart." And in that small moment, she realized the story wasn't just about loss or revenge or empire. It was about legacy. About teaching the next generation that strength doesn't shout, it endures. Now pause for a second. Because here's where this story touches you. Think about it. How many times have you been written off, doubted, or humiliated by someone who thought you were powerless? How many times did you stay silent, not because you were weak, but because you were growing in private? That's what Madeline did. That's what thousands of you have done, quietly rebuilding while the world wasn't watching. And that's why this channel exists. To tell stories like hers, stories of people who rise when they have every reason to quit. So if you're still here, still standing, still fighting through something, don't just scroll past. Because every time you subscribe, you're not just clicking a button. You're saying, "I see myself in that strength." You're saying, "I believe silence can build empires too." Sometimes the people who break you are the ones who teach you how strong you've always been. Madeline didn't win because she owned a hotel. She won because she reclaimed her worth. And if you've ever had to rebuild yourself in silence, this story is for you. Subscribe, not for us, but for every version of yourself that refused to stay broken. Because one day, your quiet strength might just be someone else's survival story.